Hello, Hazel. I'm Linda. I'm just going to welcome you to this session and hand over to you to take over. I just wanted to flag something to you and all the participants. Welcome to the participants who are joining us for the second session, live session of the day. I just wanted to give you a heads up that load shedding is going to start at 11. So if you want to charge, you'll make sure everything is charged. I hope it doesn't affect any of our panelists until 12 o'clock. But Hazel, I would like to hand over to you. Please take over the session and thank you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, Linda. Please do confirm again if you can hear me so that I can
hear you. I can hear you and I can see you, Hazel.
Great. I'm so excited that you can see me and hear me. So welcome everybody to the Trans Identity in Africa conversation. My name is Hazel and I'm an African feminist, I'm a gender activist, and I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to be the chair for this panel. So we are going to have a very interesting dialogue with so amazing speakers that are coming in to talk to us about trans identity. And I'm so excited. I hope everyone is so excited as well. So we're first going to have our questions to our panels, which are going to give us so amazing answers. And then after that, we are going to open the conversation to the rest of the audience. So feel free to comment anything in the chat box. Feel free to put any questions. We are definitely going to have time for that. So for now, I'm now going to introduce our panelists, and I'm so excited, guys. So we have the amazing Robert Hamblin, who is a parent and a visual artist. His art has become more about queerness, and as a transgender man, he has founded the Dynamics organization. He's amazing. Robert, if you can hear me and see me, can you just wave so that we can see you? Super, that's great. I'm so excited to see you virtually. And we also have Landa Mabenge. He is an author of Becoming Him. He's a transgender educationalist through his independent consultancy. He's an academia, and he holds a BA from UWC and a BCom from UCT. Landa, if you can hear me and see me, can you just wave so that we can see you? Wow, we can see you, and definitely we can see the waves. Thank you so much for joining. So we also have Siv Grayson. Siv Grayson is a Black trans dyke artist and an activist in an academia. Siv, if you can see me or hear me, can you just wave? Yes. That's the energy that I'm looking for. Definitely. Thank you so much for joining. And lastly, we have Sandile Ndelu. Sandile is the founder of the UCT Trans Collective, and she established a Trans University Forum at the university. Sandile, if you can see me or hear me, can you just wave? Yes. I am so excited that we are all here, and I'm praying so much that we all not get affected by the power cuts. So this is it, guys. We are going to have a very powerful, a very interesting, a very engaging conversation. And we also want you, the audience, to comment, say something in the chat box so that we see that you are here with us in solidarity. So I'm going to start with you, Sandile. Tell us a bit about the contribution that your organization, UCT Trans Collective, have made, which you have founded. Over to you, Sandile.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am currently based out of Los Angeles, California. And so it's a great pleasure to be in community with people despite the time differences. So the UCT Trans Collective was created out of a space of deep yearning for community amongst trans and gender diverse students during the Rhodes Last Fall movement at the University of Cape Town in 2016. Broadly, it had two broad goals, right? The first goal was to directly engage in the movement space and sort of create and shift the narrative towards a more expansive understanding of gender and gendered embodiment, and how that within itself is a key part of the decolonization process. For those of you who are familiar with the Rose Must Fall movement, it initially was geared towards the removal of the statue of Cecil John Rhodes from the center of the University of Cape Town. And it also expanded to a larger demand for decolonization of the academy, of knowledges, and of ways of being. And we wanted to shift the conversation that the movement had started around decolonization within the university space and inject a gender critical lens to it. And so that was the first contribution that we made, is to enrich the Rhodes Must Fall movement. The second contribution that we wanted to make was we wanted to capitalize on that particular moment, which was a moment of incredible change or potential for change within the university space. And we wanted to we saw that as an opening to push the University of Cape Town to a more friendly environment for trans and gender diverse students, faculty members, as well as staff and workers. So that is essentially the contribution, right? So I think sort of looking back, I think an analysis of the effectiveness of the UCT Trans Collective can of course be up for conversation and debate, and hopefully during the course of today we'll have an opportunity to chat more about that. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the contribution that you have done in terms of shifting the conversation and enriching the Rhodes Must Fall. Thank you so much for that. I am inspired. So now coming to you, Robert, as we read your bio, it actually shows that you are a very creative artist and your career started in photojournalism. So we just want to find out from you, what does art mean to you in terms of communicating your key message to the rest of the world? Over.
Oh, Jojo, thank you. It's lovely to meet you. And in activist style, I'm going to resist. I'd rather want to say something else. I want to say thank you. I'm so grateful to be here and to be with Siv and Sandile and Landa. Landa's book meant so much to me when I read it. It was in a time when we were not this vocal yet and in the light yet, and it meant all the world to me. Sandile, I discovered when I was watching her on screens while that movement shifted this country, and we still haven't even measured the amounts that it had shifted this country. And I saw her show her body, put her body in danger all the time. And she became my absolute hero. And I see how I can see how your voice became full of difficulty when you described that time now. And I remembered it too. And I just want to say thank you again. And then Siv, I discovered a week ago, and today I read the article that you made a protest against what happened at UCT and the doctors that spoke about us as if we don't exist. And so I'm in love with you too today. And so that's what I'd just like to say. I founded the organization. I was one of the founders of the organization Gender Dynamics many, many years ago when we didn't even have language. And thus, it was almost every day fighting as if we don't exist. And to now stand in a time with people like all of you and Jojo, the youth, that is speaking out the way you do, I just want to say I have great joy, and I feel almost like I'm struggling to speak. I feel so emotional. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. And I'm able to do my art today the way that you did ask me a question about art. My current art is basically self-portraits. I don't think I would have, and my work does go into spaces that can show me with my body and my scars and things that happen to my body because of being a transgender person. And I don't think if it wasn't for all this work that all of these people and you're doing, that I would have been able to practice my art the way that I do today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really beautiful. And thank you for recognizing the strength that we all have. I'm actually feeling honored that I'm speaking to, amazing, amazing people. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your art. It actually, I've been looking at your Instagram. I wasn't stalking, I'm sorry. I was looking at your Instagram and I was just seeing so amazing. It communicates something and I was like, wow, this is it. This is it. Thank you so much for that. So now coming to you, Landa. Robert has also talked about your book. And when I read your bio, the first line was, Langa is an author. And I was like, wow, we need to talk about it, with your permission, of course. So maybe you can share with us, what was the inspiration behind writing Becoming Him? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. So great to see everyone, especially Robert and Sandile, who I've known personally for 2 years. Nice to finally meet you as well. What Robert doesn't tell you is that he's also an author. He's written a book as well. And you mustn't play down here. So Becoming Him really was, for me, a testimony of the intersectional lived experiences that I embody. It was a narrative that I'd always wanted to share, but as you grow and as you become and as you get into who you are, you develop language, you discover new ways of understanding and embracing who you are. And I think by 2018, I had almost a clearer understanding of the man that I was becoming, the man I'd always been, and how I had sort of evolved over time, especially given the restrictions of home spaces that don't really allow you to exist beyond the pink and blues that we are sort of painted with as we are born, as we come into the world. So it took me coming to Cape Town, studying at the University of Cape Town, and slowly but surely finding spaces where I could get the language, the lexicon that spoke to me, my identity, who I was becoming. And so as a Black transgender man who is originally from a peri-urban area on the outskirts of Umtata, I felt it was necessary to share those experiences. Also, not just the rosy part of my intersectional realities, but the most, a memoir is those experiences, those memories that stick out, that shape you in big ways. And so I think for me, that is why I found it to be necessary, and also because there's a paucity of Black trans narratives globally. I've just come back from the University of Sussex, where I did my master's in gender studies, and I've completed that now. And I realized that part of that learning and part of those engagements was to get Becoming Him into the lexicon of Sussex, which is something that I've done, because we are inundated with narratives from the global north, where we need to, relate to this or understand it or find points of connection, which is difficult when you realize that as an identity, as a human being, you are the sum of many parts. You are an intersectional beauty. So for me, that is why it was very, very important. And I think in my research as well, as an intersectional scholar, I try and look for solutions to find ways of creating access. One of the papers that I will always reference in my scholarly work is the work that was done by Sandile with the universities in South Africa, you know, looking at what the barriers are. Why is the language not part of the health facilities at campus, at campus healthcare facilities in public institutions, which, by the way, are public healthcare institutions. So I think it became necessary from that perspective. Obviously, it's a part of my narrative. It's a part of who I am. I'm definitely going to write another memoir because I'm still becoming, I'm still evolving, I'm still growing into who I am. And I think it for me, it was just necessary to share that, because though my narrative will never be a blueprint for what it means to be a Black transgender man or a transgender identity, I have found points of connection with a lot of young trans identities who have found ways to connect themselves to what they need to be connected to health resources. So I think, in a nutshell, that's why it was necessary for me to share my lived experiences. And I guess, fortunately, because I come from a space where getting into Cape Town, I could create a safe space for myself. I mean, I remember Robert was one of the first people I spoke to at Gender Dynamics, you know? So in getting access to the language, to the health interventions, I was able to build my confidence to a point where I was able to share my lived experience without backlash really from my home communities or my families. For me, it was bigger than me. You know, it was bigger because I was not going to be erased, but there was also this entire community that is not going to be erased. And that was the motivating factor.
Wow, thank you so much, Landa. Thank you so much for sharing that inspiration, and we are able to tap into that inspiration. I can tell you that it takes a lot of strength, courage, determination to get to a point where you embraced your identity. And I feel like this is something that is still lacking, and we need to continue having this conversation. Thank you so much for that. So now coming to you, Siv, I know that there is always one thing that is important, especially to us as activists. What is it that you think that there's one thing that is lacking in our fight for a free and decolonized world? Over.
Yeah, that is a question. I mean, oh, I'm stunned. I really didn't expect that. I think I want to start with where I'm at right now, which is, you know, I've been in after what happened with the article in Daily Maverick, I took some time in a clinic to just pull myself towards myself. And since then, I've been just trying to re-anchor myself, because before I went into clinic, I think a large part of my sense of self and also my reason to live was for changing and fighting to change the world. But that energy can be so fragile sometimes that someone like the VC or a doctor can shatter it. And that's, you know, what happened to me and why I just had to go into the clinic. So since then, I've been trying to reestablish my relationship with activism, to be very careful with my intention, or rather very careful with like what I imagine activism as a doing, like what place it has in my life, what I imagine the outcome to be. And I think like I am both in a place of overwhelming fear. I think, you know, top surgery is such a complicated process. I went through top surgery back in May. And the narrative was always, you go in sad, you come out happy. And then when I went through it myself, I was like, it's a bit more complicated than that. But the biggest shift for me was going from a body that could navigate specifically South African public spaces in a particular way, to a body that has a very clear marking of transness. And it's been really difficult to feel safe in the country since my top surgery. so with all of these things, you know, there's so much to be worried about, but what has kept me going has been trans community. It has been trans kin, it's been trans comrades, it's been trans friends, trans lovers. I don't think I would be able to navigate and to do more than survive, to thrive, to feel at home, to feel joy if it wasn't for trans community. In fact, I think of the trans collective at UCT as one of my first landing spaces, as one of my first homes away from home, where I met lifelong friends like Carbon, like Safe, and where I started to see, I don't know, I started to see the light in some ways, that trans people could be happy, could be held. So in terms of your question, you know, what are we missing? I don't know, who is this we? But I can tell you that for a long time, as someone who knew they were trans but didn't have the language for a long time, I was incredibly lonely. And what I was missing for a long time was trans community. And now that I have it, now that I do have a trans picnic to attend in Cape Town once a month, with over 20 people, and it just amazes me. And I look around at us and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know we exist, but look, we're here existing. The trans community, that building solidarities, building networks of helping each other get through this life thing, I think that's been giving me life, like quite in so many literal ways. It's really been a lifesaver, a life holder, a life enricher.
Wow, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for highlighting that. One of the things that is very important is our solidarity. We have each other. We need to support each other. We need to make sure that we are always there for each other. Thank you so much for that. And just to remind our audience that we are going to have a plenary session, so feel free to say anything in the chat box. Feel free to have a mental note about any question that you have for our panel. So now I'm going to give our panel another round of saying their last words, whatever they feel like they need to air out, whatever they feel like they need to say to the audience in terms of the trans identity dialogues, whatever that they feel like, I just need to let this out. I just need people to know about this. So I'll start with you, Sandile. Over.
I mean, I think this is such a difficult conversation because there's so much to say, right? And I think in the absence of sort of more direct prompt, it really is difficult to cast a net that will land with all the comrades that are in this space. I guess what I could say is, you know, perhaps we can think about and just sort of pivoting from the various contributions that the other members of the panel have given today. Perhaps what we could think about, I think, quite seriously as a collective, which is transnational, which traverses race, traverses class, traverses so many other sort of intersections of hierarchies and intersections of oppressions, is to think about what solidarity means across the board. I think, you know, the title of this panel is Transfeminism, and I'd really be interested in a conversation that tags transfeminism with the incredible contributions that have been made by Black feminists as well as womanists from the continent and the diaspora, and how we can sort of have those ensure that these sort of several strands are in communication constantly. I think I'm oftentimes aware of the privilege that I have to have so many feminist sisters in solidarity. Some of the people who have been my keepers have been Black feminists, have been womanists, and that's sort of a very visceral experience for me. But oftentimes I miss that politically. Oftentimes I miss us having those political, oftentimes potentially difficult conversations about how we can all exist within this tumultuous space. My work has taken sort of a transnational tint of late, and there's so many communal difficulties that are happening elsewhere in the world. They aren't happening on this continent. That's something that we should be proud of, no doubt. But I also think that there's work for us to do as a broader community, particularly as we see more and more a lot of the gains that we've been able to achieve over the last decades being rolled back by a sinister organization of regressive actors, predominantly from the West, evangelical Christians. I'm interested in thinking, I want to speak about the situation in Ghana and what cross-movement solidarity looks like. I want to speak about North Africa and what transnational and trans-movement solidarity looks like. And to have those conversations in safe, contained spaces such as this one, which we often don't do enough because of time and space and resources. We have this opportunity to do that, and maybe we should.
Thank you so much for saying that. There's a lot that needs to be done, and we need to continue having this conversation. And I'm going to give this chance to Robert to say anything that you want to say regarding this conversation. Over.
Thank you, Landa and Siv, for reminding us that that being a human is always on a continuum. And that we're not just trans people that walked into a hospital and walked out another gender. I really appreciate that from your two different perspectives, and for Sandile for bringing us back to our feminisms, which also is on a continuum, right? And has to grow all the time. And we can never just say, I'm a feminist and know that that's a stable identity too. Another continuum or a trajectory rather, that I observed while I was working as a NGO worker at Gender Dynamics was the one that burnt me out. And I think all activists experience that on their first chapter of being an activist. So you there now, Sandile, I remember when you were in pain, Landa, we spoke about it often. But here we are, we're back on our feet, we're doing it again with more wisdom. But what I experienced was working with transgender children. And I experienced them in privileged homes in Sea Point, where a father would beat up his boy because he put on a dress. And I experienced children in the awful shelters of Cape Town, and trying to assist all these children while I didn't really quite understand what had happened to myself, even as a child. And eventually trying to get assistance from government organizations, and for a particular child that was caught out as a boy in a girls' shelter. Had to go assist on the ground there immediately, and then trying to find a place. And where this big dramatic thing happened over months where nobody knew what to do with this child. And eventually I got an email actually from the Deputy Minister of Social Services, who said to me, sorry, Mr. Hamblin, there's no place for children like that in South Africa. And I didn't understand what it even meant. I was just emotionally and viscerally devastated. There was no academic support for me, or, you know, we were 2 people or 3 people working at the organization at that point, just grassroots activists, totally working from a disparate view of me, a privileged person working, you know, in shelters. I'd been an artist before that. Anyway, I left the organization when it was being taken up by younger people and Black people and activists that were coming up. I went to lick my wounds. And eventually when I came out from there, I started working at Sweat with the transgender sex worker woman there. And because it's the organization, the nature of it was obviously working with people that, that were on the margin and were not safe. Well, the reasons why they access services there, I mean, of course, they were having beautiful lives on the other part of their life. But I saw the trajectory going from these, when we started sharing our stories with one another. And it always started out as a teenager that was in a home environment or in a school environment where they did not understand this child's identity, as if such an identity didn't exist. And the child is expelled, or the child self-expels. And of course, the underworld, as our friend Lee Davids used to call it, as a place for children like that. Yes, yeah, we will acknowledge your gender identity, but you know, the price is your body, and the price is your innocence, and the price is your future. And there's this big conversation now, today, happening in public about children. And I'm seeing that the conversation, I still don't always know how to participate, but I have a godchild who is 14 years old. And recently she shared some very personal stories with me where her group of friends are all experimenting with gender identity. 3 of her friends have decided they are gender non-binary, and they have given themselves non-binary names. And all of it is joy. And I was like, and she keeps telling me how they laugh and participate. And so what I asked her was like, did they tell their parents about this? And she said, oh no, they don't see a necessity for that. And I realized it's because they're not having a crisis. And I remember when I was a child and I was experimenting with my identity as a teenager, I couldn't include gender because I didn't know I could. So we would just choose names that were gender non-binary, like mine was Jamblick. Came off my same surname. Hamblin became Jamblin, became Jamblick, but that didn't have gender on it, and I really stuck to it. And so I want to say to parents today that are having this panic about their children experimenting with gender, that you need to see the difference between a transgender child and a child who is still discovering their gender and their identity, and that they see themselves as having the luxury of including the gender binary in finding their identities. It's not a crisis. It's just an option today, as opposed to children who really have a crisis. A transgender child that has a disruption in their life, that can be recognized with isolation, with pain, with depressions. There's things that happen like cutting, and there is a total disconnect from their community. Not this previous thing that I described, where children are together discovering their identity. And that is the difference that needs to be recognized. And I want to say to parents and adults that are in these children's lives, you cannot assist these children with a life coach. That's one of the experiences I've had recently at a school, a life coach, or just because you think you know your own gender, you can assist your child. These children need professional help, and they need specific professional help from people that deal with transgender issues. And so that is on my heart today, and I can't get that story out enough, is the difference between a transgender child or a child with a gender identity crisis, as opposed to children who are joyously including that in their discovery of themselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm really sure that it really helps, like just to know how to help your child when she is having some gender identity issues. I think that is really, really important. Thank you so much for raising that, Robert. So over to you, Landa.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think for me, and I always sort of foreground this in my thinking and in the work I do in my research, trans identity, any identity, are not monolithic. No two humans have the same experience. And I think it's important to remember that and to flag that in society and in our minds through the work that we do, that just because we've discovered this language and it's now becoming part of our lexicon, it does not mean that we are monolithic beings with linear experiences. We're not. And I think, yeah, so for me, that's the critical, that's the crux of it. And secondly, you know, the rooting of identity, trans identity, in mental health discourse, Western mental health discourse, can be extremely, extremely sort of degrading. It's a form of gatekeeping, because you are telling a human being that for you to actually become or be who you are, who you know yourself to be, or who you're discovering yourself to be, you need to pass through a series of psychiatric evaluations. I mean, when I began my journey, that was the hard and fast rule of it, you know. And at some point, I had to accept that as the lesser of two evils, because it was either I was going to continue drowning in an identity that was planted on me from birth, or accept this pathology and get into my journey. And I think, from my perspective, that's where the academy becomes crucially important, because while we do have a necessary role for the mental health care providers, it is not to determine whether or not someone is trans or not, or gender diverse or not, or non-binary or not. No, it doesn't work like that. And so that's where the access comes in. And I always encourage, you know, in the spaces that I do consult, mostly have consulted for the US Embassy USA, for Standard Chartered banks, big corporates. I always encourage the use of gender neutral language when speaking to or about our fellow human beings. It starts unpacking and it starts chipping away at this ideology that you have to be an either or. That for me is where the issue lies. There's no either or here. There's a beautiful spectrum. I did a TED talk about 2 years ago, and I made use of colors. We all grow up learning about the visible spectrum of color orangey birth, right? And yet at birth, we're all either boxed as either pink or blue. What happens if you're an orange or a yellow or a green or a violet? And that's reality. So yeah, for me, it's to position global South narrative more sort of visibly into the lexicon of the academy, but more than anything else, to remember that trans identities, not one identity, trans identities are not monolithic. Human beings need to stop this business of wanting to prescribe to others how they ought to live their lives. I think Paulo Coelho said this very well. Everyone has an idea of how others ought to live their lives, but none about their own. So I think that becomes the important work. And it's also so refreshing to see this multi-sectoral approach to these conversations. You know, we have different experiences, different levels of engagement in different areas in terms of this work. And that is how we eat this elephant, a bite at a time. And you know, that eventually gets us to a point where we eliminate the gatekeeping as well. You know, I get that some identities will have a more passionate approach because they've been part of this building of this landscape that is accessible to all, such that they guard it with their life. That's great. But let's try and find a point where we can come together and have these conversations, unpack them, and see how we can really get to a point where we you know, that the pathology for me is the biggest thing, and the importance of not seeing human beings as monolithic. We're not, and will never be. So yeah, that's my passionate sort of stance when it comes to trans identity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I love this open discussion because we tend to have so much wisdom and we tend to learn a lot. Thank you so much for telling us that. And remember, there is no one trans identity. There's trans identities. Thank you so much, Landa, for that. Over to you, Siv.
All right. I have two things to say. First one is to cis folk. I appreciate that some of y'all cis folk who are listening in or who are not have made a move to think more about pronouns. But I want to make it very clear that using the correct pronouns is not the beginning and end of fighting for trans people. And that I would actually encourage you to look within yourself and to start asking very important questions about how you navigate your own gender. Because even if you are a cis woman or a cis man, there are aspects of being either a woman or a man that may not sit well with you. Because I think that sometimes cis folk, you may think that trans people are very vastly different from you. But there are actually conversations that we can have about the limitations of how gender is perceived that can really have us in conversation together. So just to repeat, cis folk, great that you're doing work on pronouns, amazing. That is not the beginning and end of if you want to call it allyship or just respecting another human being. I think that there's more that we can do. And I think it's important that you also look within the self and start with the self, because there's a lot to be learned there. Secondly, this is to trans folks now. Firstly, hello, I hope you are, wherever you are, that you're held, that you have people. I think it's very important for us to put ourselves in the living archive. I think it's important that we write books. I think it's important that we take pictures. I think it's important that we start podcasts. We've heard and have been hearing from cis people for a very long time. And cis people have been, in many ways, the ones who have decided what it means to be trans. The ones who have decided on the language, such as born in the wrong body, the ones who have decided on language such as assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth. There is a lot that has been decided for us. And I think that it is crucial that we do our own archiving. Very, very crucial. I mean, conversations like this, I wish it didn't have to just be 1 hour. I wish we had more hours. I wish we could have more trans youngins. I think that there's so much to be done, and there's so much value in showing ourselves to the world. I also think I want to caution that visibility is complicated, that there is such a thing as hypervisibility. There is such a thing as being so visible that it becomes dangerous. But you know, I implore you to find more trans kin, trans comrades. Hit me up on Instagram if you're in Cape Town, and I'll send you things about the trans picnic. I think that we can weather a lot of things together, and that you really, you don't have to do it alone. You don't. And I love you, trans people. Like I know we're all different. I know that it's complicated. I know that some of y'all aren't really here for non-binary people. I know that we have, you know, complications that we can talk about as trans folk in our trans spaces, where cis people are not there, and we can, you know, talk about the difficulties in our community. But overall, I'm a big fan of us. I'm rooting for us. I'm doing it for us. So know that there's at least 5 people who are looking out for you in some way or another.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm now arranging to come to Cape Town just for the picnic. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for telling us about documenting, the importance of documenting. Let's write, let's put ourselves out there. Thank you so much for that. So now we have 15 minutes and I'm so excited that we have different comments. We have people on YouTube commenting, giving out questions. And so when I ask a question to our panelists, I'm asking for you to just reply in at least a minute so that we have time to make sure that we attend to all the questions that we have. So the first question is from YouTube, from Nokutula. She said, I would like to inquire from Sandile, Landa, Robert, what are your thoughts on lobbying for donors to provide financial support towards transitioning specifically to top surgeries? So I would like to ask Siv to maybe respond to this one.
Yeah, I've been asked this, as you can imagine, a lot on Instagram, and my advice is usually very curt. I don't want to paint a beautiful rainbow of a picture to you. Getting strangers to give you money for top surgery is very difficult. And a lot of the times it will require you to speak both to a trans audience, but also to pander to a cis audience. I think one of the things I really want to mention is that a lot of people who publicly, who do like public fundraisers, a lot of those that gain traction are people who already have a social network following, or who are already popular in some kind of way. This is not to give you less hope, but this is just to paint a very real reality of how these links get shared around. People who are already popular are usually the ones who get to push them. So yeah, my advice is to write something really sexy on the landing page, something that unfortunately cis folk will be able to relate to, and that it's going to be a difficult journey, and that you're more than welcome to Instagram me and I will go into more detail.
Okay, thank you so much. So this question is directed to Sandile, and it's coming from Moketi. Pardon me if I didn't pronounce it well. So Sandile, here is a question. How would you advise students and scholars who I like writing on masculinity in university male residents to engage the special case, the agenda and articles in it that yourself, Barbara Boswell and Simakele wrote? I hope you got the question. How would you advise students and scholars who like to write about masculinity in university male residents? Over.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So in 2007, Professor Barbara Boswell, as well as Smamkele Dlakavu, and I co-edited a special issue of Agenda, the feminist journal. And the special issue was on women and non-binary activists' contribution to the Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall student movements, specifically within 2015 and 2016. The submissions that we received and that we published as part of that special issue were diverse. Sort of, I think, illustrated the diversity of thinking within the student movement and people who were looking from the outside into the student movement. Many of the articles were from students who had participated in the Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall student movements themselves. And they were in many ways trying to articulate and write themselves into the archive in terms of various topics, ranging from how Black consciousness relates to violence, how Fanon and feminism can be read together or not, from various protests, etc. The advice, to answer the question directly though, I think the advice that I would give to folks who are interested in masculinity studies is to perhaps so follow in the footsteps of folks who've been thinking about masculinity in sort of the contemporary times in which we find ourselves in the South African context. I'm thinking of people like Kopano Ratele. I'm thinking of people like Gobani Kambela, who have all been trying to grapple with what being masculine and what being a man means in this particular moment in time. So I would advise them to follow in their footsteps and be in communication with a lot of those articles that were published there. I do think that a lot of the folks who that we published as part of the special issue were in many ways, oftentimes in very express ways, sometimes in non-express ways, were sort of commenting on masculinity. And I think folks who are writing on masculinity more directly can have a conversation with a lot of those articles. So we can sort of keep the conversation going with masculinity in this current moment, particularly from young people. I'm also would be interested in contributions around trans masculinity. Okay. I think that's an underexplored space. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandile. And this question, I'm going to direct it to Langa, and I'm going to kindly ask you in a minute. So this question is from Helen. She said that as a mother of a trans teenage son, I find myself fearful and wanting him to pass in courts to protect, yet this desire reverts back to a gender binary. How does the trans community view passing in courts? In a minute, over to you.
Okay, so thank you for that. So for me, parsing for me is an extension of my expression, my gender expression. So as a masculine sort of expressing transgender man, this is how I look, you know. Firstly, kudos to Helen for, you know, embracing their son's journey. That's amazing. And I get the fear because the world can be extremely unkind. But I do also get that there are a lot of safe spaces. Perhaps they're not widely known. I mean, Siv has these picnics that I've just learned of today, which could be spaces where the deeper or the more relevant dialogue can happen in terms of getting sort of some insights into what could work, how to better support, how to not sort of restrict your son into this binary, you know, the gender binary, and allow them to lead through their expression. So that would be my advice. A lot of us older trans identities, and I don't speak for everyone, I speak for myself. I think we've kind of like had to navigate a lot in terms of what works, what doesn't work. Which spaces can you go to? Which spaces do you not go to? Where do you expose yourself? How do you limit the violence that comes with being a trans identity? It's really a learning as you go. And I think it lessens the blow when there's a parent that's actively supporting their child. And so I would really encourage you to get in contact with people like Siv, to have those conversations, especially when they have availed themselves to say, I'm here, talk to me. I might not have all of the solutions, but we can definitely get the conversation going. Like the bigger element that is life, a lot of things we discover and learn and unpack as we go. That would be my advice.
Okay, thank you so much for that advice, and I'm pretty sure that we all had it. So now, lastly, Robert, this question is from Polo. So much has been said around language and visuality and being. I wonder about the violence of pathologizing being and processes of erasure. can you, if you want to comment around the issue of language and visuality and the violence associated with that? Over.
Am I unmuted? Yes. I don't think I can do it better than Alok V. Menon did. And I want to read this. Being trans means existing in the underbelly of language. The premise of speech is the promise of it. But what about those of us whom there are no words? It's not that we don't exist. It's that we have been written out of language. Pronouns then aren't just about the ability to use a word like she. They are ultimately about our ability to be. This has never been about who gets to speak. This has always been about who gets to live. And then they talk about all the legislation happening in the US at the moment that's anti-trans. A pronoun is a word we use to stand in for a noun. A noun is a thing, something that emphatically and unequivocally exists. We are not allowed to exist. They use their adjectives to deny us our pronouns because they do not believe that we are nouns. To them, we are verbs. They call us dangerous because we are, distracting, deceiving, destroying. These are not merely things we do. They are things we are, always doing, never being. And then I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the end goes, it says, never forget, things are not only spoken into existence, they are also spoken into extinction. And so when I was young, I didn't, believe all this language I heard from academics, but now that I'm older, it's everything.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert, and thank you so much to everyone that has managed to join. Unfortunately, our time is up. It could have been great if we had, I don't know how many hours to just talk about this, but there's still time. So I just want to thank everybody who has managed to join us on YouTube, on Zoom, having the comments in the chat box. Thank you so much to Robert, Landa, Siv, and Sandile. You all are amazing. Thank you so much to everyone. And remember, our solution lies in our collective strength. My name is Hazel Jojo, and I was your chair. Bye.
Well done, Hazel.
Thank
you so much. Thank you. You're great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hazel. Thank you so much. Your enthusiasm is so bubbling and infectious to all of us. Thank you so much. And I thank you so much to your panelists, Landa, Siv, Robert, and Sandile, for sharing your stories with us, for sharing your experiences, and for being part of this AFEMS conference. And yes, I hope this space that you go able to find more communities. And I hope this is one of the communities where you can come and do some of your academic work on transfeminism. Thank you so much, and thank you